If you ever believed that the infamous vials of white powder presented at the United Nations in 2003 represented the absolute zenith of military imagination, then congratulations are in order. The current US administration has just elevated that legacy to an entirely new echelon of creative storytelling with a lethal new fashion accessory, the nuclear suicide vest. We are no longer merely witnessing diplomatic friction, we are entering a bizarre era where global geopolitics are being operated using scripts that seem to have been ripped straight from a 1980s B-grade action movie. High-ranking officials of the world's leading superpower appear to be engaged in a surreal competition to see who can issue the most technically implausible and logically defiant statements on the international stage. Vice President J.D. Vance recently sent shockwaves through public discourse by earnestly warning the world about the possibility of Iran deploying nuclear suicide vests. According to his logic, an individual attacker could simply don a wearable device capable of vaporizing tens of thousands of people in a single instant. Let us pause for a moment to apply basic physics and engineering mathematics to this claim. The smallest nuclear device ever produced by the United States, a nation at the absolute pinnacle of nuclear miniaturization technology, was the W-54 warhead, which weighed approximately 23 kilograms, about 50 pounds. Even if we assume Iran possesses a technological miracle allowing them to shrink this further, a suicide bomber would still have to carry a massive, heavy metal assembly, a firing system precise to the microsecond, and an incredibly dense lead shield just to prevent themselves from being cooked by lethal radiation before they even had the chance to press the button. In the world of Vice President Vance, however, these trivial technical details are irrelevant. The primary objective is to cultivate a level of fear profound enough to provide political cover for the fact that the US has dropped thousands of bombs on Iran without a visible victory in sight. Vance's subtle hints regarding a backdoor diplomacy trip to Pakistan while simultaneously broadcasting rhetoric about nuclear vests is a jarring contradiction. It is the diplomatic equivalent of a man holding a flamethrower while simultaneously inviting his neighbor to discuss fire safety regulations. This brand of fire and brimstone diplomacy serves only to alienate rational actors and heighten the risk of a miscalculation that could ignite the entire region. If J.D. Vance is concerned with nuclear fashion, then Secretary of War Pete Hegseth has truly opened the world's eyes with his creative approach to geography and mathematics. He enthusiastically informed the public that Iran had lied when they claimed their missiles could only travel 2 kilometers, when in reality they can fly 2,000 kilometers. In truth, it is virtually impossible to find any official in Tehran who has ever claimed their strategic missiles only have a range of 2 kilometers. That is the range of a high-end slingshot or a festival firework, not a strategic weapon. Iran has always been transparent about the 2,000-kilometer figure as a voluntary limit. Yet Hegseth, with the excitement of a child holding a map, for the first time boldly declared London is only 4,000 kilometers from Iran. How can you still say Iran isn't a global threat? This line of reasoning represents a genuine breakthrough in illogical, strategic thinking. Following this logic, since London is roughly 5,500 kilometers from New York, does that make New York a direct existential threat to London? Or, because I am standing near you, am I by default an assassin? This is a strategic approach so superficial that it borders on the absurd, reducing complex global security architectures to a rudimentary, finger-counting lesson from the 1950s. Knowing the distance from Iran to London is not intelligence or espionage. It is a basic skill involving the use of Google Maps. Utilizing such a flimsy justification for potential military escalation undermines the credibility of the entire US intelligence community on the global stage. It is impossible to satirize these allegations without invoking the founding father of modern American justification for war, the late Secretary of State Colin Powell, and his legendary vial of white powder at the UN in 2003. Back then, the US swore that Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction, WMDs, and was only 45 minutes away from being able to strike the United Kingdom. The result: 1 million dead, a nation left in ruins, and the only thing massively destroyed was the reputation of American intelligence. Today, the MAGA administration appears desperate enough to exhume that exact tired script, merely swapping the name of the antagonist from Saddam to Iran. They claim Iran is only 1 week away from a bomb, despite President Trump himself asserting just last year that he had completely wiped out their nuclear program. This contradiction is so laughable that even Washington's closest allies are left asking, is this a vial of salt or a nuclear vest? The fact that Hegseth and his team believe they can conduct a preemptive war without allies, without a legal framework, and then turn around to attack other nations for not being supportive is a sign of a profound strategic pathology. They seem to have completely ignored the findings of the Chilcot inquiry into the Iraq War, or the historical lesson of how ISIS rose from the ashes of fabricated justifications. The reality is that seasoned MI6 intelligence veterans and sober-minded generals across the globe are viewing Trump's war with deep-seated suspicion. The astronomical costs, the risk of total regional escalation, and the very real possibility of being sucked into a death quagmire 10 times worse than Iraq are staring them in the face. Yet, in Washington, officials seem busier weaving tales of nuclear vests than they are reading historical textbooks. While the US remains fixated on these absurd fantasies, Iran is responding by bared teeth in reality. Tehran has threatened to withdraw from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty (NPT). For Iran, remaining in the NPT at this stage feels like allowing a thief into the house to inventory the assets before they return to commit the robbery. The blatant defiance and in-your-face aggression of the Trump administration are pushing Iran into a corner where they feel they have nothing left to lose. When you back a nation into a corner using transparent lies and devastating airstrikes, do not be surprised if they actually begin to construct the very weapons you have spent months falsely accusing them of possessing. Ultimately, the allegations of nuclear suicide vests and the feigned shock over the distance to London are nothing more than clumsy attempts to justify a war that is already failing strategically. The United States is attempting to sell the world a phantom fear to mask the reality that they are dragging the global community into a circle of fire. If this conflict truly erupts into a full-scale war based on such ridiculous premises, the tragedy will lie not only in the number of lives lost, but in the realization that humanity learned absolutely nothing from the vials of salt of the past. The credibility of international law hangs in the balance as the rhetoric moves further away from physics and closer to propaganda. The current situation in the Middle East resembles a high-stakes chess match where both players are holding all in cards. On one side is Washington with its supposedly decisive military plans, on the other is Tehran with its stubborn resilience and a set of defiant ceasefire conditions. Let us look deep into the so-called 15-point list from Trump and the 4 military scenarios currently on the US agenda to see exactly how fragile the line between peace and total war truly is. The movement of troops and the rhetoric of diplomats are now converging toward a point of no return. According to leaks reported by Axios, the Pentagon has finalized 4 scenarios they refer to as game changers. Notably, none of these plans aim for an immediate regime change. Instead, they focus on strangling Iran's economic survival. The first involves the occupation of Karg Island, the heart of Iran's oil industry, which processes 90% of its crude exports. Losing Karg would effectively sever Iran's financial jugular. The second and third involve seizing Larak and Abu Musa Islands, which serve as strategic outposts at the throat of the Strait of Hormuz. By controlling these, the US could claim it has reopened the strait to Western shipping without fear of IRGC, speedboats, or radar harassment. Finally, the US is considering uranium and tanker hunting, seizing Iranian tankers at sea or conducting surgical strikes on nuclear facilities to decapitate their enrichment capabilities. However, President Trump is still hesitating. Why? Because every boots-on-the-ground operation is a double-edged sword. Landing troops on Iranian islands means accepting a protracted war of attrition, something the American voter has no appetite for. While the military prepares for battle, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff has delivered the 15-point list to Tehran. While it contains diplomatic phrases like sanctions relief and civilian nuclear cooperation, it is essentially a list of maximalist demands. The US wants Iran to stop all ballistic missile production, limit its nuclear capabilities to near zero, and surrender its control over the Strait of Hormuz. To Tehran, this is not a negotiation. It is a demand for surrender, wrapped in the thin veil of diplomacy. Experts familiar with the region were correct in predicting that Iran would flatly reject these terms. In fact, only hours after receiving the news, Tehran issued a cold response, stating that the war would end when Iran decides it is over. Most surprisingly, Iran did not retreat. They issued 5 counter-conditions for the United States. They demanded full war reparations, an end to targeted assassinations, and a formal US recognition of Tehran's absolute sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. This stance indicates that Iran believes they hold the upper hand in the energy war. With 20% of global oil blocked, gas prices soaring, and NATO allies hesitant to send troops to support a US mission in Hormuz, Iran understands they possess a high-value hostage, the global economy itself. Trump's greatest challenge right now is credibility. He cannot declare victory if the Strait of Hormuz remains under Iranian control. This is the primary reason why approximately 15,500 US ground combat troops are currently being surged into the region. Military analysts believe the primary objective of this force is the capture of Karg Island. If Trump can seize Karg within the coming week, he will have genuine leverage at the negotiating table to force Iran to accept his 15-point list. However, one must remember that Karg is defended by the very mobile air defense systems and hardened underground bunkers we analyzed earlier. An amphibious assault could quickly turn into a bloodbath directly on top of the world's most critical oil storage tanks.